Renew. When did it start? Where did it? Was it in a pub over a pint or?
Well, the Renew Party was set up last autumn after the general election by some independent candidates who stood in the election and then decided they didn't want to end it there. They wanted to continue. So they founded Renew. Then I joined very quickly after. And the platform is Rethink Brexit, Renew Britain. And I think we were all really concerned about the direction the country was taking. I mean, obviously we were very concerned about the decision to leave the European Union. We felt we didn't quite think that was necessary after the referendum, which was such a narrow majority. So we really decided we actually needed to set up an actual new party. Existing parties are failing us. Somehow they've led us to the situation we're in through complacency and also lack of integrity. And many MPs are not standing up for what they know in their best judgment is not good for Britain.
Yeah.
So we want to restore some sanity, if you like, to British politics and also reconnect back to the British public.
Yeah, it's interesting you say sanity because obviously since 2016 June, things slightly fell away. At least, do you feel like that was perhaps an insane reaction, or what some might say a howl of agony from those that haven't been, say, disenfranchised by politics over the years?
Well, I mean, I think everyone was flummoxed after the referendum. No one was really expecting that people would vote to leave the European Union and commit such a monumental act of self-harm. So obviously there was a big cry of anger behind that, which we really have to pay attention to. There could have been another reaction to the result, which would have been having a commission of inquiry, really looking at the reasons behind the vote, pursuing alternatives to being in the EU and making sure people knew what that really meant. And we really feel that nobody understood the impact, the consequences, and the amount of good cooperation that there is between us and the EU, and the positive legislation that we've actually approved and brought into this country through the EU. And bearing in mind people didn't know all that, we don't really think it's the right thing to do now, especially as people are waking up to this fact.
Yeah, and I mean, so I listened to a couple of things that you guys have done for the press. I think it was Today or one of the programmes.
LBC?
5 Live, maybe? Who knows?
Yes, we've done a lot. We've had a lot of media coverage. It's exciting. Yeah.
And a lot of people are saying en marche, Macron. Who's your doesn't matter about the noises in the background, it's fine. But my listeners understand. Who's your? Do you have do you feel like there needs to be a central figure to get this thing like really off the ground, or is it more, come one, come all, we'll all do it together?
Well, I think we really are a grassroots movement. And I wasn't convinced at the beginning. I thought people from outside politics, what are they going to know? But actually, the interesting thing is that when we've had our 1,000 applicants to be MPs, and we brought together 100 of them and supporters, and the amount of ideas they've got and the desire to really renew their communities, to reshape Britain, it's actually really heartwarming, and it gives us hope to continue. So I'm actually really convinced now that if we bring in people's ideas, nurses' ideas into the health sector, actual people working in those fields, and combine it with the best expertise through our policy committees, we really can come up with something new and fresh for the country. And it really needs it. We can't go back to the status quo, even if we manage to stop the Brexit process. We've got to go on. Too much has happened.
Yeah. Do you think that the wheel has, Khaleesi in Game of Thrones wants to break the wheel? You don't watch Game of Thrones. There's a shaking of the head there. And she's like, she wants to break the wheel and what have you. Do you think that the referendum has been largely, the wheel has been not necessarily broken, but the genie's out of the box? And it's hard to put it back in, and Fox, Gove, Johnson, they're trying to put it back in, but with what the hell was Johnson on about yesterday, for example? They don't know really what they're doing, and it's in their eyes now, you can see it, they don't know what they're doing.
Well, certain politicians like Boris Johnson, he never really believed in leaving the European Union. I mean, obviously he was an opportunist and he looked for his moment. And I think that's clear because he still talks about the deep and special relationship with the EU. Well, we all know that's impossible. We're just basically telling the EU we don't want to leave, we don't want to be with them, we reject them. How can we expect them now to have a closer relationship? It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Politicians are obviously playing games right now, even Jeremy Corbyn. He's inching towards a bit of a closer relationship, but we know he's not a pro-European person, and we know he's not pro-NATO, and he's going to take this country backwards in many senses. And it's really distressing for us because we're used to the to Britain being a really good force in the world and in Europe.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I do have a tendency to go slightly off topic and all over the place. I was listening back to an Anna Soubry conversation I had, and we were making really good points, and then I decided to just go off on an absolute tangent. And it doesn't really help, so I'm going to try and stay on topic. You were talking about the 1,000 applicants you had to be MPs, like PPCs and what have you. That's pretty exciting. And the 100 that you've narrowed them down to 100.
Yeah, we haven't narrowed them down to 100. We've not processed them all, obviously.
I was going to say, that's how on
it's a lot
earth
of
do you...
people.
Yeah.
And we're also getting hundreds of ideas every day from other people determined to really support us. So it's a struggle to keep up with it all as a small new party. However, we're determined to respond. I mean, we've basically got different rounds of interviewing people and engaging with them. We're going to do training events around the country, in all parts of the country, and also in Scotland and Wales. And we also had our first training event in London, and the response has been phenomenal. So we know it's a challenge, it's a mountain to train up all these people to be ready for Parliament, ready for a snap election, if it happens.
Yeah.
And obviously do something in the local council elections in May. But we're determined to do it because we actually don't think we have another choice right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in terms of the council elections coming up, I mean, say if you were to rewind a couple of years, you'd have had 2 years on the go, building and building and building. What's the actual chance of getting anywhere? I mean, it's only May. It's May's like, 3 months away?
Yes, we think this is an unprecedented situation with the two major parties in the country riven against each other and internally divided as well. And people are very disillusioned. They don't know where to turn right now. Traditional Tory or Labour voters are really disillusioned with both parties. So in this environment, it's actually very plausible that a new party could come through and sort of steal the centre ground and be the voice of the best interest of the country.
Yeah.
Obviously, local council elections will be important. We've got to show we can fight and win elections, but we are still a new party, so we'll do as best we can based on our commitment.
No, of course. I mean, my only concern would be for... My background is Liberal Democrats. Obviously, I think a lot of Lib Dems are quite worried about the 8% in the polls, or even lower. Who knows? And how that didn't, their Brexit manifesto essentially just completely fell on deaf ears. And there are 100 bloody reasons why it didn't work in the general election, but they're not doing fantastically well. Come the council elections in London. I can generally, hand on heart, just see Labour destroying everything, like absolutely whitewashing or redwashing the entire city in a blanket of red. And I think the Tories are pretty terrified. Where does a small fledgling party fit into that?
Well, it's really interesting with Labour because obviously they did well in the last election, but yet I'm not sure people were really clear that they were opposed to Brexit, and obviously they're still not opposed to Brexit, they're still sitting on the fence. So where do the Remainers go? Where do people go who either believe that we need to stay in the EU, reluctantly or passionately, and the people who are changing their minds, who are not sure anymore, and who actually would love to maybe have a second shot at this, now that it's more complicated, more costly than they ever thought. So where do they go? And that's why, again, we feel a new party. Liberal Democrats, obviously we share their pro-European stance, perhaps empathise with some of their policies, but they're a tainted brand. They're a spent force, they're tainted from their time in the coalition. What else can we say about them, really?
Yeah, I mean, because I know a lot of people that have voted Lib Dem, and they felt a little bit peed off about the coalition years, like you just said, and I suppose when you go door knocking, I've done a bit of count, a year and a half ago, I went out and tried to help the Lib Dems in a council by-elections, and one in Richmond, and that was more of it. Well, that was a national campaign in Richmond, but a lot of people in London, specifically sort of southeast, northeast, everywhere, the trendier areas. You knock on the door, you go Lib Dem. There's a lot of animosity there, specifically around tuition fees. Still, people don't get that. That is now, I think, that was about a year and a half ago. Now, I think that's starting to maybe drift away a little bit because of the advent of no deal and the absolute chaos that I'd like to say Prime Minister Farage is putting into this country, but that's stolen from Lord Adonis. He thinks that it's Farage's Great Britain, which maybe to a degree it is. But I mean, where are we? I mean, if Lib Dems couldn't push through, how? And they've got a big old, lineup there. You've got. I mean, say what you like about Vince Cable, he's a known figure. Where does Renew fit, and how do you burst through?
Well, I think that's the problem, isn't it? That Liberal Democrats have been around a long time, like the other parties, and I would suggest maybe there's some complacency there. We've actually had quite a lot of supporters coming to us from the Liberal Democrat Party, or people who work with them, and they said they're not that open to new ideas. And the beauty of a new party is you've got no choice. You've got to connect with the electorate. You've got to go back out to the field and say what's working, what's not, what gives you hope, what do you want to change.
Yeah.
And actually, in doing so, it's actually the absolute right moment to be doing that, because we are at such a crisis moment. And actually, if I would give any advice to Lib Dem, in my humble role, it would be that they need an entire rebrand. They need a new set of faces, they need a new image, and to sort of have a new design for the future. What we want to bring to this is a vision. Now, we understand the lure of Brexit for some people in this sort of utopia that sort of might come afterwards, which we don't agree with and don't believe in at all. But what can we lure people to that's not Brexit, to draw them away from Brexit?
Yeah.
And this is where we need to fashion a new vision. And it's not easy to do. It's going to take time. And that includes being a full member of the European Union, of course. But what does that mean about Britain itself? Who are we? How do we want to bring everyone back together? Is there another kind of way that we should behave? Should we rebalance the economy, restructure our inequalities, pay more attention, north-south? And it's a difficult one. It's not going to be easy. But we've got to start the process.
Yeah.
Because we can't go back to the status quo anyway.
I mean, when you say I personally feel that we need to remodel our position within the European Union. Full stop. I mean, I don't know why we. I know it's an age-old adage, but when you do go around Spain, France, Portugal, wherever, the European flags are everywhere, right next to the national flag. Why don't? I mean, that's a worrying thing. I mean, I know I'm harking back here a little bit, but it would be quite interesting to maybe get your perspective on why this thing happened in the first place, why we had this whole array of nastiness that infected our sort of public, consciousness, and then resulted in a referendum.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Europe has always been seen as very distinct from Britain. We've not really seen ourselves as close to our European neighbours as other European members do. I worked at Euronews for 3 years. I've worked in international environments. It's natural to me. But I understand that it's not been that way for people here. They've always been ambivalent about the EU or not known very much about it. Our politicians never talk about it. They don't attribute back any successes in Britain back to a decision that was made in the European Commission.
Why is that?
Because they don't talk about it. They only talk about it in terms of some little regulation here and there. But people didn't care about the EU till 2015, by the way. If you look at Murray polls between 2000 and 2015, it was on the bottom of like a list of 10 things people thought were the biggest challenges for the UK, underneath the NHS, the economy, jobs, immigration. And it was only whipped up in that virulent time in 2015 and with the immigration crisis into Europe, the refugee crisis, the Greek debt crisis, terrorist attacks in France. And people like Nigel Farage were able to say, oh, look at that chaos in Europe. We don't want it coming to our shores. We're at breaking point. And it somehow tapped into that disillusionment of people and twisted it against Brussels, and it's completely false. And I think we're seeing a little bit of an understanding now that that's a busted flush, that's not true.
A layer of bullshit. I mean, a thick layer, and he's managed to take it into the stratosphere. I mean, in a way, do you almost, and don't take offence by this, do you almost sort of, well, you can take offence, if you like. I'll reference Farage. Do you not think there's a slight part of you that almost admires their UKIP's ability, his ability to have taken them, like you said, from an absolute nothing, it's totally inconsequential to most people's minds, the European question, to suddenly we all want to leave Europe, or 17.1 million people want to leave Europe, or whatever. Literally out of nowhere, they rolled that unicorn into the sunset.
Well, I don't admire them at all, UKIP, because obviously they've helped lead us into a wrong direction. I mean, where there are some similarities with us and UKIP is that they did try and tap into the grassroots. They were from outside the establishment, and they were sort of coming out of nowhere, if you like, and actually challenging Westminster. And that, in a sense, is what we're doing too. However, we know they've used extremist language. They've whipped people up against foreigners for quite a long time. And it is taking us exactly in the wrong direction. But what I do want to say is that we are patriotic, if not more so, than UKIP. We really passionately care about Britain. We don't want to see people hurt. What is Farage going to say when actually trade goes down in the Midlands and the North East, and people's and workers' rights and all these things are affected? How is he going to explain that leaving the EU did not help them? It actually made their lives worse.
Well, I don't think he's going to have to explain anything, is he? Because he can just, if it really is going to go south, then he can just stop his show on LBC and then just take a little yacht down to, wherever Trump's hanging out when he screwed up America, and they can just go, oh, what? That's the thing. There's no accountability now.
Well, yeah, and it's very telling that Nigel Farage ran away the minute after the referendum was held. He knew it was going to be massively complicated and difficult and actually a nightmare. So I think deep in their hearts, some of these people know what they've done, and they know that eventually they're going to be found out. Farage was in USA last week at the Conservative conference supporting Trump, and he sees what's happened in Britain as the same as what's happening in America. Some big movement of people who feel disaffected and aggrieved and kicking out against the elite and the media and everything. I think they're going to be exposed sooner or later. I hope it's sooner rather than later, because I'd rather we don't actually leave the European Union before that damage is done and then we have to come back in. But, who knows what's going to happen next? All I know is that this is the moment. We hear a lot more voices coming out, campaigning groups, even MPs, and prominent voices actually saying, hey, we don't have to do this.
Are you getting anybody from the Leave side that have sort of strayed into the centre ground and are now firmly in the camp of, this is a terrible mistake, I'm coming to Renew to listen to what they have to say?
We've had some people regretting, and sometimes people are doing it quietly. Most of our supporters have been people who want to remain in the European Union, but we have found there is a shift. I mean, I would love to find some prominent Leave voters as well as ordinary Leave voters. In fact, we're going to be going out on the streets in the next few days to see, who still feels the same way. Yeah. And we certainly have heard lots of anecdotal information. People didn't realise that our doctors and nurses came from the EU, or that scientific collaboration was, going so well with the EU, or particular parts of the country were funded by the EU. And now they're realising that. We are hearing that they want to change their mind. Yeah. But there's more to do in that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, also, so I suppose the party, Renew, you've got to renew people's faith in the European Union. I suppose it's funny because so many people, loads of people, while I'm sat here, I had absolutely no idea of half, not even half, 1/10 of what the European Union actually does and what our role is within the European Union. And if it wasn't, for people like Nick Clegg and what he has to say and the referendum itself for the, I suppose we're like most people, you listen to facts and, geez, really? Wow, we do all this amount of trade with the European Union, this outside the European Union, and it's made me realise, it's really woken me up. Did the party name come from sort of like renewing people's hope or something like that?
I think it did, and it was renewing the politics, it was renewing our relationship with Europe, renewing our own internal, how we work as a country, and why has this country not worked for everyone? Maybe we have been in our bubbles and not really aware that people were feeling so angry in other parts of the country and not getting ahead, and the wages hadn't gone up for 10 years and the living standards were the same, and especially our older voters really worried about loss of cultural identity as well. And we haven't paid attention. We're obviously paying a price for that. So it means you have to go back to the drawing board, I think.
And is it sort of a single party issue? I've looked on your website and what have you, and obviously you address what we need to do economically, environmentally. Could you thrash any of those ideas out? Perhaps, I suppose you'd have to say the NHS. What are you planning for the NHS and how to rescue us from this crisis that we're in?
Well, in honesty, we're not fully developed on our policies yet, because what we wanted to do was go back to the country and actually get some really good ideas from people, and actually then feed them into policy committees, which we've just started to set up in sort of 7 areas. So obviously we do know the NHS is a big problem for people and the strain on the NHS. obviously leaving the EU will not help, and has also already put costs up.
Wow, yeah.
Led to a shortage of doctors and nurses. But these are going to be big issues to solve. I'm not saying we've got the answers right now. We may need modest tax rises to pay for this, and we may need to reform the health service entirely. Obviously, immigration is a big area that we do need to look at some of the negative impacts that maybe have affected certain areas, while reminding people that immigration has definitely been good for this country.
Yeah.
So there are all sorts of complex and difficult things to solve.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a case of just throwing money at everything that needs to have money thrown at it, but we are going to spin up some really robust policies, but they've got to be quite innovative, because we've got to address the inequality on the left side, and we've also kind of come at this in a modern progressive way, that we are embracing the future, embracing the world at the cutting edge of sort of technology, and embracing all that artificial intelligence and everything that's going to affect us, but somehow make sure that the benefits are distributed more equally in the country.
Yeah, and have you spoken to people that sort of like Neil Lawson of Compass, for example, or Gina Miller, and there's Open Britain? Do any of those, are you collaborating at all, trying to get ideas or anything like that, or do you see yourself more of your own individual sort of, not island, but your own stream, as it were?
It's really interesting, because we're sort of the most credible new party that's come forward. So we are distinguished from the movements and the campaigns. However, it's been really nice to actually meet people that are in solidarity with us, and actually we really all feel the same way. So while they are campaigning to encourage people to rethink Brexit, we're about what comes next.
Yeah.
We're the party that's got to deal with the future. And personally, I don't want to see Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister. I don't want to see Theresa May as Prime Minister, or Boris Johnson. So we need some new figureheads, and that's what we are looking at for the future.
And you're doing a tour of Britain, right? So a listening tour.
Yes.
Can you expand on that a bit? Because that sounds quite interesting. And obviously, it does sound. I suppose from my background, when I started getting more politically active, I listened to ideas from people like Clive Lewis, and I go, "Whoa, that's wacky, that's weird." And then you start listening to it more, and you start realising that, that's just called democracy. That's just called a coming together of ideas, and it's quite interesting and exciting. And I suppose a tour of Britain is pretty cool. And I've seen you went to Cambridge and Oxford and Essex universities. How did that go down?
Well, I mean, we're obviously starting, and I think the idea of the tour is that we're listening to Britain again. We're doing a mix of road shows, engagement, not only with universities, but schools and colleges. We've got a survey going out like Macron did. We've taken some inspiration from Macron's movement. And I think that, yes, in a sense, it's very obvious that that's what we need to do. We need creative ways to engage people again, and show that we're listening, and then coming back with responsive policies. But I think our gold dust is going to be our candidates and our supporters and our volunteers, because they themselves have fantastic ideas about how to do things in their communities, about food security or homelessness, taxation. We have reams of ideas coming in, and what we need to do is process that. And then it really is something that's coming from the people. It's not just a cliche, and I think that's what's good about it. But you need a system, you need a machinery to help make sure that what we get from people actually comes back and feeds into something that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that is a challenge, but we're going to do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What do you see as your biggest challenge at the moment? Is it funding? Is it bodies on the bodies on the ground and feet on the pavement? Is it door knocking? What is it? Is it a whole? Are you on top of everything, or is it just? I can't imagine what it must be like to be in your position.
It's really hard, actually. It is really hard. And I think we've been through some of the difficult parts where we actually, we sort of discussed, well, how far should we talk about Brexit? How far should we talk about renewing Britain? And we still have those arguments, because a lot of people around Britain don't want to talk about Brexit. They want to talk about housing and wages and the health service and immigrants. And we have to talk about those things with them. And it's not all about Brexit. So, that's a challenge already. But I think that our biggest challenge, at the moment, is really coping with the support we've unleashed, if you like. Yeah. And I think that we need to spin up very fast to deal with that and become a very credible party. Yeah. We're looking for funding. A lot of people are very sympathetic with what we're trying to do. It's almost like we're too soon. We're ahead of our time a little bit. There may well be a couple of other parties that come up. We would really hope that we could join forces, because if there are too many good new parties, it might really split the vote.
I would agree with you on that one. Where is there an open channel there for people that would, if they do? I mean, obviously you'd like to harvest all the great ideas and have people come to you. Is that realistic? To keeping an open doors policy and hoping that other parties, if they were going to form you, they could just come to you guys, or?
Well, we do have some back channels going on with people who are thinking about it. And of course, everyone's waiting to see what happens, and also deciding their own political philosophy on the way ahead. And that's understandable. So we've sort of said, well, maybe we'll come together slightly later on, if it's appropriate, and if we kind of all agree with each other's vision. In terms of existing parties, I mean, what we are saying is that we are open to cooperation with anyone that shares our vision. Obviously, we're coming from outside politics. But to be honest, if politicians come in, join us early, if they were interested, if they've really tried to show some courage, if you like, in standing up against where we're going now, then of course we're willing to talk to people.
Yeah, you say courage and MPs. I mean, I suppose a lot of them are sitting on the fence right now. There are people that obviously are vocal, don't get me wrong. Are there any ones that you would say, come and join us? Chuka Umunna, just you're not comfortable in the Labour. Well, you are probably very comfortable in the Labour Party. You've got a seat for life, and you are, he's much loved by the Remain lot. But at the same time, my God, wouldn't that be a statement if he left? And would you invite him in? Would you want a figurehead like Chuka?
I don't know. It's a good question, really. I mean, I really think we'll have to deal with that. I mean, we saw Dominic Grieve address people a few weeks ago, and he really was very pessimistic about the Conservative Party and where things were going. And you wondered how some of these MPs can continue to stay within the Conservative Party. But they have decided that they want to stay because they need to stay for the final vote. They need to be there. And that's understandable, actually. So I think it is sad to see a historic party like the Conservative Party no longer being the party of strength and stability and prosperity for the country, but being the opposite and taken over and hijacked by the right wing and this extremist view, this irrational hatred of the European Union, which turns everything good into something bad. And we've just decided we won't have it. We don't accept that. We need to go back to people again and talk to them about this. And make sure they've understood everything. So we're open to all political discussions at the moment. I think that's really important because it's about bringing the country together. And I think people want to see politicians working together. They don't want to see everyone fighting and scoring points off each other. They want to know that we care about the good of the country, and we're going to put that first, not party loyalty and our own ambitions.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I completely agree. I do. For me, I know how British people... I don't know how British people are. I have no idea. Sweeping statement there.
I'm shocked as well.
I kind of thought I knew my... I don't know, my neighbour. I knew my neighbours, my friends, obviously, but the wider British public, in terms of those that you sometimes see in Vox Pops, I do get slightly concerned about. But I don't know why I raised that.
But William, how often do you go outside of London and travel the country?
Like never. It's horrendous, absolutely horrendous, and it's just sheer laziness. But I mean, I want to take this podcast out around London, around the UK a bit more. Yeah, it's time, it's work. Obviously, it's very, very hard. I don't have that funding, but you do. The thing is, you get trapped in that bubble. And then before you know it, you're thinking, well, why isn't everybody thinking like me? I mean, all the podcasts I listen to, they're all Remainers. All my friends are Remainers,
But I think, if you read reports like the Demos report, Citizens' Voices...
Okay, I'm not familiar with that. But.
And it sort of interviewed mostly over 50s around the country, and they have such a different view of the country. They're nostalgic for the past, for the old industrial times when everyone had a job and, young people respected authority and they could wave their flag and not be accused of being, overly patriotic or nationalistic. And they yearn for those times. And it's very strange because we remember the old days in kind of negative sense, post-war period. So that has been really a surprise to us. I mean, our young people are where the hope is as well, because obviously they're upset, they're losing opportunity, they're losing their freedom, they're not gaining freedom, their ability to work, travel and study cheaply and easily. And we're losing everything that we were told we'd be gaining. We're losing control in decision-making in Europe. We're not taking back control. And all this, that we're losing influence by the day. And so, but it is fascinating about Britain. I, like you, want to travel much more around and talk to people in rural areas, coastal areas that have seen some decline. And if we read these reports that are coming in and we talk to people ourselves, we also see people haven't been doing well. And while some people in London, happy cosmopolitan lifestyles and, fancy restaurants, it's not the same for everybody around the country.
Well, and even in London itself, I mean, there are boroughs of London that voted Leave, but I suppose the next generation is. I know that Nick Clegg does talk about it in his book, and he's spoken about it before he lost his seat in the House of Parliament. That it's the really worrying thing is the next generation. Is your message to the next generation, not next, but the sort of 17, 18, 19-year-olds? Is that a good area for you to go for?
I mean, it would be a temptation to say that we're just going to care about the youth, and there's a youth movement going on, and obviously we do. But this is actually for everybody. I actually genuinely care about the older voters, and all the country in a sense, even people who voted Leave. This is not one side against another anymore, and we can't think like that. So yes, there's always going to be a small group of people who are passionately anti-EU and passionately think that Britain can only become imperial and proud once again if it leaves the EU and cuts all its ties. And it will never change those opinions. But we're still convinced that this is the best thing for everybody.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to operate on that assumption.
Okay, cool. And I suppose before we call it quits today, it would be cool to just know a bit more about you, really, like your background. I know we briefly touched on that earlier, but when did you start getting all when did you get political, if you have been?
Well, I was a journalist for 10 years, and I worked at Euronews in France, which is interesting because I couldn't get a job reporting European issues here in the UK.
Yeah.
So that was already telling back in the 90s. And then I've worked in conflict zones for 12 years.
Oh, wowzers.
And so I've seen what instability does, what pitting people against each other.
Whereabouts have you worked?
I was in Afghanistan for 5 years, Somalia, South Sudan. I worked at the International Criminal Court. I've worked on EU election observation missions, supporting democracy around the world in all countries. So I've seen how important stability is, democracy, good governance. And I've seen the UK standing up for these things in solidarity with friends and actually being a voice of reason and very strong about justice and issues like that in the international community. And that's why it's really heartbreaking for me, because if you talk to our embassies abroad now, they don't know how to behave. They're facing kind of astonishment from their local interlocutors who don't understand who Britain is anymore.
Yeah.
We've always been so reliable and pragmatic and strong on these key issues, and now suddenly turning away from everybody into isolation and this sort of bizarre decision. And that's actually really damaging for us. I'm determined that we shouldn't lose the Britain that we know we are.
Yeah, no, of course. I agree. Identity, it's on the one hand, my identity, I'm an isolationist or I'm an internationalist. It's a strange one. And like you said earlier, I don't think people actually really give that much of a shit or even actually think about it like that. When you raise Brexit on the doorstep in areas that aren't that, inclined to do so, sort of London, what have you. And it's quite funny when you knock on a door and go, right, we're here to talk to you about Brexit. And they go, what do you mean Brexit? I don't just pay me more, man. Just give me like £10 an hour. Don't treat me like a sack of shit or something. Give me more hope. Give me something to believe in. But sorry, carry on.
I think people are obviously fed up with the issue in many ways, and of course now it's sort of the misunderstandings of yes, let's leave Brexit or let's stay in Brexit. So there's all sorts of strange things.
Yeah.
But I think they are understanding. We know people have been very disappointed with the way the government's handled negotiations. They feel that it's been completely messed up. They don't know what Britain really wants, and we don't know if we're going to stay in the customs union, out, single market, out, what's going to happen to security issues and all our cooperation, foreign policy or any area really, environment, workers' rights, everything. So I think people are waking up. I think they're not happy with how the government's performed. They thought the European Union would bend over backwards to make some fantastic deal with us. Now they realise that's not going to be the case.
Yeah.
They'll prioritise their own interests. This whole idea of global Britain and global trade deals seems more elusive now. I think it always was to many of us, but I think for other people now, who's our great white hope? The US with Trump? I don't think so.
No way.
So, it's I think there's an awakening, and I don't blame people for having been misled at all. Why should people have to know about the EU and all this boring bureaucracy that comes with it, necessarily? It is a lifelong kind of education, in a sense, about the EU and about the UN and about our membership of all these organisations. And you can't do it in 3 months during a city campaign, and it takes 2-3 years, and it takes education in schools to start. What's Britain's position in the world, and post-colonial era, what has actually helped us. So I think that's what we've got to go back to, really, education.
Yeah, no, absolutely, great. I mean, there's probably like a whole bunch. I think if we randomly struck up a conversation in a pub, and I go, oh, you do that, do you? Oh, I love politics. We could have I don't know. We could probably do this for like a couple of hours.
But I think so.
It's been a really cool chat. Is there anything else that's you want to talk about before because sometimes you press stop on a interview and then they go, oh, I did want to talk about that. Oh, and that would have been really good, wouldn't it? Oh, why didn't we carry on recording? No, the moment's gone, man. But I mean, so maybe a leaving message for anybody who's interested in Renew.
I think the leaving message, first of all, is Renew really does care about the country, and we're not just trying to cause trouble or disruption or instability. On the contrary, we want to bring back stability to our country. We're immensely proud of all parts of Britain and everyone in the country, and we want to make sure we continue to be a proud and happy country. But we've got to go back to basics here. We've got to also remember that the European Union will move on without us. They're already annoyed that they have to waste their time with this silly complex negotiation that they have to do now, and which is going to continue for years to come. And it's not fair for us to involve the EU in our complexity and our problems, to be honest, which at the end of the day is our problem. Let them worry about their own people and moving forward together. We've got to face big challenges, climate change and terrorism and economic inequality across Europe and populist movements. And there's a lot for European countries to deal with. It's not fair for us to drag them into our mess. So we're going to have to sort ourselves out. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And then where can you the web address and stuff like that?
Yes, we're at www.renewbritain.org. You can sign up as a volunteer or to keep up to date with our newsletter, and follow us on Twitter at @renew_Britain and on our Facebook page.
Great, nice work. Cool, right.
Thank you very much.
See you later, guys. I'll see you soon.
Bye. Au revoir.